To all who come to this happy place, welcome.
Now, I like Disneyland. I don't know if you were able to guess that based on my, upload history, but I do. And I've had something in my collection for a good number of years that may or may not end up changing the way that you view the park today. Now, where did I put it? Is it, it might be... Oh, it's right here. It's been in the background this entire time. None of you have noticed it? This is a 1958 map of the entirety of the Disneyland Resort. Now, it may just look like Disneyland Park, but if you look real closely right here in the corner, you can see there's the hotel district right there, and then Holidayland. What a time this was, 1958. The future was full of possibilities back then. Okay, here we have a high-res image of it, so you can actually see it for this video. And the closer you look at it, the weirder things get. Yeah, that's Disneyland from above, obviously. There's the castle, there's Main Street, there's Liberty Street? Okay, hold on. This, my friends, is a 1958 map of Disneyland drawn up by Sam McKim, given away as souvenirs to guests who visited the park during that year. Known sometimes as mouse maps, there are 3 different variants: 1958A, 1958B, and 1958C. This variant right here that I have hanging on my wall is A. You can tell because it doesn't feature Cascade Peak anywhere near Frontierland, and the Jungle Cruise water is not blue, but green. This is 1958A, and let me tell you, it contains a lot of lost attractions that we never ended up getting at Disneyland. And today, I figured, why not do a little tour? Why not take a small adventure around the Disneyland that never was, the Disneyland of Walt's imagination in the year 1958. This was only 3 years after park opening, keep that in mind. Walt was dreaming big at this point of his career, and as we may come to find out throughout the course of the rest of this video, maybe a bit too big. If that's even possible for Walt. I take that back, it's not. Just for reference, here is the earliest known map of Disneyland from 1955. You can see it down there in the bottom. This is what it originally looked like, with all of the lands and attractions. Here is the 1958 McKim map. There is a lot more going on here than there was in the 1955 map, and that's, like I said, just 3 years. And of course, here is a actual 1958 guide map that only features attractions that are open and operating, not ones that are conceptualized at that point in time. So, no imagination here, just cold, hard reality. Our first stop takes us back to where I began this dang video, over at Liberty Street. Now, if you are a fan of Walt Disney World and the Magic Kingdom, you may have some familiarity with a Liberty-themed land, but over at Disneyland, alas, it was not meant to be. Now, originally pitched as International Street, a sort of miniature version of the World Showcase, oddly enough. Although over time, enthusiasm from Disney Imagineers for this tiny World's Fair waned, and so instead of the International Exhibition in 1958, it was announced that Liberty Street would be taking its place instead. The whole area was to be themed after the American colonies in the late 1700s, during the Battle of Independence and shortly thereafter. They even put a dang sign up in Town Square announcing that this new expansion was coming to Main Street USA, and to get excited, everyone, Liberty Street, it's happening, hooray! It never happened. A cobblestone street would have led you down Liberty Street to the main hub, Liberty Square. Wait a second. Liberty Square, where you could then enter Liberty Hall and view a show called the Hall of Presidents. Wait. The Hall of Presidents. Okay, obviously they took heavy inspiration, if not outright copied, Liberty Street from Disneyland for Liberty Square for the Magic Kingdom when it eventually opened in 1971. And honestly, I am kind of glad they did. I love Liberty Square. And that's not just because it has the Haunted Mansion, okay? Even though that's a big reason. It also has the Liberty Bell. So why did poor little Liberty Street never end up seeing the light of day? Well, that, my friends, is because back in those days, the early days of Disneyland, Walt Disney and the Disney Imagineers at large knew how to manage their money and knew that Tomorrowland over here needed a bit more help than Main Street USA at the time. So they went ahead and invested in Tomorrowland. No people mover yet, though, but we did get a monorail, we got a Matterhorn, and we got some submarines. So, I mean, it's a win-win, honestly. 3 new attractions for Tomorrowland / Fantasyland. A little bit better than, just a hall of presidential animatronics standing there talking to you about freedom and liberty. I want to see a Yeti. Dang it. So we never did get Liberty Street. Instead, now we have a meet and greet area and an area where the characters come out to greet everyone on Main Street USA. So I'd say we traded up in that case. And of course, Walt would revisit the Hall of Presidents idea, except for in this case, it wouldn't be the Hall of Presidents, it would be the Hall of President. Just one. Old, honest Abe. Back to the map, you may have noticed that I've been sort of skirting around a certain area, and that area is right above Liberty Street, known as Edison Square. Now, this is something that we never got in the parks. In a way, let me explain. Edison Square was meant to be built around the late 50s or the early 60s, similar to International Street / Liberty Street, and was planned to be a Thomas Edison-themed mini-land, or neighborhood as we would know them today. Who wouldn't want to go to Thomas Edison Land to learn about Thomas Edison? Various homes along the square would showcase different technological innovations around the time of Thomas Edison, culminating in a show called Harnessing the Lightning, which was sort of a precursor to the modern-day Carousel of Progress. If I had a nickel for every time an early Disneyland concept for an expansion to Main Street USA was retooled into an attraction for the 1964 World's Fair, I would have 2 nickels. Should have called it Tesla Square, although then it may send the wrong impression and then people would be doing donuts in their very sharp, very pointy, dangerous, weird-looking trucks. I feel like at this point we've overstayed our welcome on Main Street USA. What do you say we venture further into the lands of Disneyland? How about we go to the left-hand side? That's usually what I do. I go right into Adventureland / Frontierland when I arrive at Disneyland. What's different about this version of Frontier / Adventureland? Oh, it's got a mineral hall. Now, interestingly, Adventureland is very similar in layout, at least today, as it was when it opened in 1955. The Jungle Cruise is where the Jungle Cruise is. The Indiana Jones queue and facade took up a bit of the original opening day Jungle Cruise River, and then also added later on, you had the Tiki Room as you came in from Main Street USA, and the Treehouse as you left into Frontierland / New Orleans Square. It was Frontierland when it was built. It's New Orleans Square now. That's not important. What is important is what's on this map. Now, Adventureland was, and still kind of is at this point in time, a very small land. But zooming in here, you may notice that one of the areas nowadays occupied by the Tiki Room and Tropical Hideaway is just labeled Hawaiian Music. Now, while an attraction or restaurant just called Hawaiian Music sounds actually really cool, this was just the back patio of the Plaza Inn. Or should I say the Red Wagon Inn, as it was known at the time. I gotta say, Plaza is a much better name. But before the Tropical Hideaway or Aladdin's Oasis or even the Tahitian Terrace, it was just a back patio for the Red Wagon. Kind of themed to Main Street, also kind of themed to Adventureland. It seemed like a very unique place in the parks to just sit back, relax, and enjoy the atmosphere, which I do appreciate. And since it really didn't have a name, I guess Hawaiian Music is sort of the attraction for the back patio of the Red Wagon. But things really start getting different and interesting as we make our way from Adventureland to the Frontierland that never was. Specifically to this little corner right here that has 3 different attractions that are all crucial to the history of Disneyland. We'll start at the top with the Thieves Market and the Wax Museum, and if you know anything about Disneyland history, you know what I'm building up to. Now, the Thieves Market and the Wax Museum attraction were planned for the not yet existent New Orleans Square Land, which looked a little different from what we ended up getting and what we have now. You can see here in the top right-hand corner that the Wax Museum and Thieves Market were originally meant to be indoors. That's why you can't really, see them. They're inside. Although after some careful consideration, the Thieves Market, instead of being one contained building, was just going to be a bunch of different shops, sort of the way that we have them today, the back streets of New Orleans Square, how they wind around and sort of give off this impression that you're lost in the back streets of New Orleans, stumbling into these shops, exploring their wares. Meanwhile, the Wax Museum would show off, obviously, wax figures of criminals and pirates from the 19th century. Eventually, all of those criminals also became pirates, and it just became the Pirates Walk Through Wax Museum. Now, this may sound familiar back when we were talking about Edison Street, but enter the 1964 New York World's Fair and It's a Small World and Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln. After seeing how much of a resounding success Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln was over in New York, and the way It's a Small World was able to carry a very large amount of guests each hour, the idea for the Pirates Wax Museum was converted to a slow-moving boat ride, like Small World, and instead of wax figures of pirates acting out different scenes as you walked through the attraction, now audio animatronic pirates would act out various scenes as you sailed throughout the attraction, and thus the Wax Museum became Pirates of the Caribbean. And so this little tiny corner of a mini land within Frontierland called New Orleans Square gave us one of the best dark rides of all time. But what about this down here? Now, some Disney aficionados may have noticed me skipping around New Orleans Square a little bit. We have up here the Thieves Museum and the Wax Market, but further south we have what's labeled as the Haunted House. Now, obviously, what could this haunted house attraction be alluding to? What is this mysterious abandoned house in the south of New Orleans Square? weirdly bordering the Jungle Cruise. My friends, obviously, it's the precursor to the Haunted Mansion. Here, once again, is a view of it on the map itself. Now, we've talked ad nauseum about the history of the Haunted Mansion, the different incarnations it took at Mickey Mouse Park, and then further on at the end of Main Street, and then being a church. Obviously, here, we are further along into the development. It's a haunted house in New Orleans Square. Not yet a mansion, although it does look very big. Now, this thought never occurred to me in any of my past videos, so I am going to share it here, but this house backed up to the Jungle Cruise, right? Could we have been seeing maybe sort of a almost proto-mystic manner with this, where the house owner, you know, was investing in, say, the Jungle Cruise, but also lived in New Orleans somehow? Would it be connected to Adventureland at all? I would like to think that it would be, but, you know, maybe not. Say, just, you know, for an example, Main Street USA doesn't really have any thematic ties to the Jungle Cruise. Even if the roof of the Jolly Holiday says something else, there's not really a story connection there. And then an honorable mention, of course, to Chicken Plantation, which you can find north of the haunted house. It's gone, it doesn't exist anymore, but the facade of the restaurant can be found inside of the Blue Bayou. It's very, very similar. Here's a picture of the Chicken Plantation. Here's a picture of the Blue Bayou. So, I mean, it's pretty close. Moving from the left-hand side of the park over to the right-hand side of the park now, you may notice something a little bit different about Fantasyland. Yes, you have the Skyway, you have Dumbo, you have the carousel and the Chicken of the Sea pirate ship. All of that is great and dandy, but what is this? That's not a Matterhorn. That's just a weird spiky hill. If you notice on this map, there's actually a key down here. Let me show you. The future developments are marked with an orange X. So if we go over here to say the Thieves Market, New Orleans Square, Haunted Mansion, all of those are marked with those orange X's because they're future attractions. But this weird proto-Matterhorn over here isn't marked with anything. It's just blank. It's left blank. It's left up to our imaginations, I guess. Let's get to the bottom of this. If you know how construction works, you know that they have to dig foundations for buildings that are going to be built. And so during the construction of Sleeping Beauty Castle for Disneyland, they had a bunch of excess dirt from the digging of that foundation. And what did they do with it? Well, they just set it to the side, you know, near the castle, off to the side of Fantasyland. And when the park opened in 1955, they said, oh, that giant pile of dirt and rocks over there, that's Holiday Hill. Yes, you can go over to Holiday Hill and have a picnic. You can have a picnic over there. That's Holiday Hill where you can have picnics. Everyone enjoy. And you know what? I gotta give them all props, okay? Because the people did enjoy. People enjoyed Holiday Hill so much they renamed it Lookout Hill, so teenagers could go up there and dance and do the twist and smooch or whatever it was they did in the 50s. I don't know. So at this point in 1958, it was known as Lookout Mountain, but they knew they wanted to do something different to it. They knew they wanted to have an actual mountain there and not just a weird looking hill. Enter the world's first steel tubular roller coaster and the reason why I still wake up with neck pain, even though I hop on the single rider line and try my best to stay stable. The Disneyland classic, the Matterhorn bobsleds. Now panning a bit to the right, you may notice a submarine ride that is also marked with that orange symbol. We'll get to that in a second, but just know in advance that these two attractions were very closely connected in terms of development and construction. And also, I guess, a spoiler alert here for any of those following the story, where they're located in the park. Just know that, long story short, Walt wanted to put actual snow on the mountain and have guests race down it in toboggans. And when reminded that, hey, Walt, I don't know if you remember this or not, just a little detail. The Disneyland is in Southern California. That idea was scrapped. After deciding to replicate the new and emerging popular Wild Mouse type coaster, think Goofy's Sky School over at California Adventure, it was decided that Disneyland needed a new thrill ride, a roller coaster, and while filming a movie called Third Man on the Mountain in Zermatt, Switzerland, Walt was captivated by the beauty of the mountain and sent a postcard of it back to Imagineering to a man named Vic Green with a very special message written on it. Vic, build this. Now, is this the real story behind the development of the Matterhorn? Honestly, maybe it could be. Third Man on the Mountain began shooting in June of 1958, and the Matterhorn opened in June of 1959, just 1 year later. That's very, very fast. Although, to be fair, the entirety of Disneyland Park was built in just about a year, so, you know, they could do it back then. Although the story could be true because in mid-1958, Bob Gurr began drafting up plans for the track and the bobsled ride vehicles. So the question of, does this map actually include an early concept for the Matterhorn, or is this just a sort of representation of Holiday Hill / Lookout Mountain / that weird toboggan ride that Walt wanted to build with real snow? What? Why? What were you? It's Southern California, Walt. Mr. Disney. And although the mountain isn't labeled, the submarine ride is. The lagoon is all mapped out. However, this map doesn't feature any sort of monorail depiction. It's nowhere. There's a tram bringing guests to the Disneyland Hotel. The monorail also opened on the same day as the Matterhorn and the Submarine Voyage. Spoiler alert, the ride was called the Submarine Voyage. I'm not going to call it the Submarine Ride anymore. And I suppose, like the Matterhorn, that serves as a good transition between Fantasyland and Tomorrowland, because Tomorrowland on this map has a lot to look at. As mentioned before, there is no monorail to be seen anywhere. I dare you to find the monorail on this map. It's not on there, but the Viewliner, however, is. Now, the Viewliner isn't really a canceled Disneyland attraction. We had it for just over a year before it was removed in favor of the monorail that would soon come to replace it. It was essentially just a futuristic-looking railroad with one station, Tomorrowland, but we can find a reference or an homage or a picture, I guess, of this extinct Disneyland attraction on the sign for the gift shop after Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway. That's just a little fun fact, just a little extra one I'm throwing in there just for you. Now, I want to shift your attention. We're going to talk about the submarine ride in a moment, but I want to go a little bit south past this proto-astro orbiter, the Astrojets, to this pink banner right here, Adventures in Science. Now, if you notice, it has that orange little symbol, upcoming attraction, a planned attraction. What is Adventures in Science, and why is it Space Mountain nowadays? And why wasn't it Space Mountain back then? We have the concept art. It looks great. What's Adventures in Science? Why? Let's figure this out. What we know and love today as Space Mountain was once called Adventures in Science. Except it wasn't. That attraction was never built. In a similar vein to Liberty Street, International Street, and Edison Square, Adventures in Science was meant to be a brand new attraction in Tomorrowland toward the end of the 50s. If you've watched my two most recent videos about Epcot, you know about my disdain for their sponsorship program, how every Future World pavilion had to be sponsored by a company. Obviously, when those sponsors stopped giving Disney money, those pavilions would fall into disrepair and oftentimes either close or be rethemed. Epcot, or more specifically Future World over at Walt Disney World, was meant to be a sort of spiritual successor. It was meant to carry on the legacy of the opening day Tomorrowland at Disneyland, where it was more so about educating and entertaining rather than just straight up entertainment, or edutainment as they wanted to do back with the early days of Epcot. And even toward the end of the 50s, in 1958 when this map came out, Disney was sort of trying to decide whether they wanted to entertain first and foremost, or educate first and foremost, which is why Scienceland, or Adventures in Science, was going to be a main attraction in Tomorrowland. Never ended up happening. Now, by the looks of it on the map, Adventures in Science was meant to be all indoors, and it would contain 4 different attractions, actually, not just the one. According to DHI, there would be a powercade, which would display motors and gears, sponsored by GM, sounds like a great time. A time travel attraction that would take guests back to the time of dinosaurs, probably showing how their bones became the fuel that we ran our cars off of. That would probably actually later go on to inspire Ford's Magic Skyway at the World's Fair, which would then go on to be recycled into the Primeval World diorama on the Disneyland Railroad. An outer space attraction which would take everything established from Flight to the Moon and just plus it, double it, make it way cooler. I don't know if this is nearly like Mission Space caliber or Space Mountain, but it's a space-themed attraction. And lastly, Micro World, where guests would take a journey through a microscope into a small droplet of water. And if that sounds familiar, yes. Yes, it does, because it went on to directly inspire Adventure Through Inner Space, a Disneyland classic Omnimover attraction that has never been repeated anywhere else in the world. I miss you, Adventure Through Inner Space, even though I never got to experience you. Now, unfortunately, nobody really knows what ended up happening to Adventures in Science, why it ended up being canceled, but if you were to ask me, if you can't tell from my whining about the sponsorship program for Epcot back at the beginning of this Tomorrowland segment, I think that's what happened. I think the sponsors, GM, Monsanto, all of those sponsors weren't really thrilled with what Disney was putting forward to them for this Adventures in Science pavilion, so they decided to delay it further down the road to do something else. Fortunately, that means we did end up getting Adventure Through Inner Space later on down the line, but we never ended up getting that space-themed attraction. I mean, we have a space-themed attraction, but not that space-themed attraction. Look at that queue. Dang. So unfortunately, we never did get Adventures in Science, but you know what we did get instead? The Flying Saucers of Tomorrowland. It's okay though, because nowadays we have Space Mountain with the non-operable blue light speed tunnel. Listen, it's Tomorrowland, okay? We gotta take a win where we can find them. Now, to end our grand circle tour of the Disneyland that never was, we're going to head back to Fantasyland proper, right behind the castle, to visit a few of my favorite dark rides. We have Snow White's Snow White's Adventures, Pinocchio's Daring, no right, 1958, the Mickey Mouse Club Theater, Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, and Peter Pan's Flight. Peter Pan, just Peter Pan, I guess, huh? And who could forget the classic, the iconic Alice in Wonderland ride? That's the name. That's the name of the ride. It's called the Alice in Wonderland ride. What's interesting here is they don't mention the Sleeping Beauty Castle walkthrough, which was open in 1958. I don't know why there's no mention of it on this map. It's in there. Welch grape juice. Listen, only in early Disneyland would you be able to find a grape juice stand as a featured attraction. It was like Disneyland's own personal Club Cool, except you couldn't get different kinds of sodas from around the world. It was just grape juice, but still sounds neat. One last lost Disneyland attraction that I think it's fun to reminisce about is right up here in the corner of Fantasyland, right next to Frontierland, the Skyway. Because while the Skyway closed forever in 1994, the chalet, or station, just sat up there abandoned, exposed to the elements for 22 years until finally the construction of Galaxy's Edge forced Disney to tear it down forever. But fear not, there are actually still remnants of that old Skyway Fantasyland station that exists today. This footage was taken very recently, October of this year, and you can still see the old remnants of the steps that now lead to nowhere that used to lead up to the Skyway Chalet. I believe the steps that I'm filming right now are featured in this photograph where you can see them plainly leading up to that old station. And I also believe this is one of two sets of steps that still exist, so if you're at Disneyland, there is another set that looks similar to this one that also led up to the Skyway Chalet. We do not talk about the Tomorrowland station though, because of what tracks it's tied to. And we definitely don't talk about the Walt Disney World Tomorrowland Skyway Station. That one's just crappy. Go ahead, you could laugh now. Now this video has been just me covering the sort of big ticket objects on this map. You know, the Matterhorn, Adventures in Science, Edison Square, Liberty Street. These are the big attention grabbing things that never ended up happening or ended up changing a little bit in the case of the Matterhorn on this map. There are so many other nooks and crannies you can look at. So many other things like the tram, the Disneyland Hotel is down here in the corner. You can sort of like plan your day at this Disneyland that never was. It's very interesting. Also, why is this Main Street ribbon cut? All the rest of them are one piece. This one's split in half. Why'd they do that? And I mean, come on, don't even get me started on the no man's land that was Holiday Land outside the berm of Disneyland. You could have alcohol there. But I feel like I want to save Holiday Land for a future video, so that may actually wrap up our little trip around the Disneyland that never was from 1958. And overall, I think it looks actually really good. There's just one note that I have, and that is there is a railroad, which is fine, but no monorail. We have the Mark Twain, we have the Columbia, that's all fine, that's all well and good, but I feel like there could be another way to move people about the park, specifically in Tomorrowland, and I feel like I'll just let Disney of 1958 ponder upon that statement for a while. And then if some new CEO had an idea for some sort of rocket rod style attraction, they could just not act upon that and we could allow future generations to enjoy the majesty that is the People Mover. Hello everybody, thank you so much for watching this video remake of one of my very first uploads ever, the Disneyland map of Lost Attractions. I hope you enjoyed it, and honestly, if you want more videos like this, sort of revisiting older videos but expanding upon them. The older video, by the way, was 8 minutes long, so I feel like I expanded a good amount on that one. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to hit the like button, and if you're new around here, you want more videos like this where I just carefully scrutinize old pieces of Disney concept art and maps, please be sure to hit the subscribe button. And if you really liked, and I mean really liked this video, please consider heading over to the link in the description down below to my Patreon page, where even just $1 a month, that's right, $1 will get you early access to videos. That way you can leave all those early comments. I see people saying, like, hey, this video just went live. How are there comments that are 2 days old on it already? That's how. It's the Patreon supporters. So if you want early access to videos, like I said, just $1 a month. There's a link down there in the description. Thank you, of course, to all of my existing Patreon members. You can also follow me on my other social medias. I am at Offhand Disney on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. So that makes it a lot easier to find me if you do want to find me. And I have a lot of TikToks actually over there on my TikTok, of course, that I do not upload to YouTube Shorts or anywhere else. So that's exclusive content, right? It's exclusive. If you haven't already, I'll put another card there in the corner to the original video. Go check that out. Compare the two. See how I have grown or see how worse I've gotten over the years. It's really down to your opinion. Everybody, thank you all so much for watching. I look forward to seeing you all next week, hopefully in the Christmas special, the Christmas video. Goodbye.